Hello and welcome to the Madecast, the official podcast of the Museum of Art and Digital Entertainment, a series of lectures on video game history as part of the Made's ongoing effort to preserve history through the teaching and displaying of playable exhibits of rare games and consoles.
While life in time of COVID has forced us to close our doors, the support of people like you has allowed us to continue to bring history to you through lectures like the one you'll hear in a few minutes. I'm Chen.
I'm Red.
And I'm Miles. This week we'll be taking a break from adventure games to start a mini-series called Made in Progress, featuring interviews with emerging developers headed by the Made's own Leland. Today they're talking with narrative designer and friend Cara Hillstock about the games and experiences that influenced them. But first, let's dig into some news.
Kingdom Hearts is always releasing news, and the biggest news now is they are bringing mods to Kingdom Hearts, as in they are releasing Kingdom Hearts and the entire franchise on PC. You can buy it today on the Epic Store, but wait until the mods are done is my little take. Are then give the community a little bit of time to create some gold. But in more important news, I think we need to talk about Nintendo's Direct. We did not get the big Breath of the Wild 2 announcement, but if you weren't expecting that, then you have nothing to lose on this one.
You can't complain, you're not allowed.
No. But the first one is Mario Golf Super Rush. That's going to be another gold mine in the golf department.
Yeah, it is.
Hopefully they will have... Did they say they have an online connection with it as well?
I actually don't know if they said anything about that.
I think they say speed golfing.
Yeah. So what I saw from the Direct was that instead of doing a sort of laid back, like chill golf game, this is very much in the style of Golf with Your Friends or Golf It, where it's basically just sort of this zoo of everyone trying to play golf at the same time. And it just becomes this mad rush to get through before anyone else sabotages you.
I think it's like golf, but Mario Kart, something like that.
Yeah.
I'm sure you have a pretty decent numbers of ways to mess up your friends playing. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's gonna be really fun to see. Taking a couple cues from Mario Party and the screw over your friends. Note that they have pretty much pioneered
Friendship Destroyer.
Yeah, in a way like no other.
When my friends and I had golf night, it very quickly turned into this just absolute like slaughter fest of, friends just doing everything they could to sabotage everyone else. And it was just the most fun. And so I'm really glad that Nintendo seems to be sort of moving in that approach.
Yes. The other big announcements are Splatoon 3 on Switch next year.
Oh, yeah. I didn't see it coming. I mean, I'm really surprised. And they have a bow. And if you play Splatoon 2, there's a mode where you kill salmons and steal the eggs out of nowhere. And it turns out that one of those little salmon has become one of your pets now.
Oh, okay. So that's what that little guy is. I was like, I'm not much of a Splatoon person as far as like playing. I love the aesthetic and I love the soundtrack as well.
That's the stuff that coming to you like zombie in that mode. I mean, and now they're your pets. I think it's a very, really interesting plot twist. You wonder what happens between them.
That'll absolutely be something to look forward to. The last bit of news, Skyward Sword HD. What do you guys think?
Well, I do expect Zelda from Nintendo Direct, but it's not the exact Zelda I'm looking for in the Direct, but I would take that.
Yeah,
I'll take that.
Yeah, it's like I'll take some Zelda over no Zelda.
I was legitimately not expecting Skyward Sword to ever be touched again by Nintendo. I think Skyward Sword getting an HD remake and being released on Switch kind of gives it another chance to actually show off that it's a good game, because I've tried to beat Skyward Sword twice. And both times I've gotten too frustrated with the controls.
You would try. Exactly. But I think it's about time that we throw it on to at least someone more capable than I, and that is Leland Heller, our resident Madeite, who is going to be talking with friend and narrative designer Cara Hillstock about the games that they enjoy. So let's throw it on over to them. And here they are, Leland and Cara.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Made in Progress, which is a mini-series through the Madecast, where we talk to the next generation of game developers about the games that made them. And for our very, very first episode, we have on Cara Hillstock, who is a narrative designer, writer, and streamer. Her latest game is a visual novel called To Be With You, and she's also a friend of mine. So welcome to the podcast.
Yay, thank you for having me on.
Thank you so much. So we just want to talk to you about your history with games. So let's start at the very beginning. What are some of the earliest games you remember playing as a kid?
The earliest game that I remember actually impacting me is The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. I played that game like crazy when I was a kid, and in hindsight, I feel like it had a bunch of impacts on me as a narrative designer because there aren't really that many games that do what Majora's Mask did with narrative back in the day when I was a youth.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely narratively a really unique game. So was that sort of the thing that drew you to games as a kid, was them having a unique narrative or really cool story?
It was the unique narrative and the really cool stories. And in some games, you got to play as really awesome female characters who kicked a lot of butt.
Yeah, that is always an appeal, especially back in the day when that was a little more rare to find in games.
Yeah, exactly. It meant a lot to me as a kid because I got to identify very strongly with the game characters, more strongly than I did with any of the way that any of the girls were presented on like cartoon TV shows back in the day, where they were all like either girly or like evil.
Or both.
Yeah. And I wanted to identify with the girls who could use a nunchuck to like completely destroy a monster. That was awesome.
Yeah. That is pretty awesome. And also to be able to, control that girl, not just watch her, be able to be the one who is using nunchucks on a monster. I definitely get the appeal. As you were growing up, maybe less of a kid, more into a teen, even into an adult, how did your taste in games change?
It changed because I got more discerning with the kinds of stories that I wanted to play. Well, not only I got more discerning, but there was a wider variety of stories and games available to play. So
yeah, absolutely.
I started trending towards games that were cozy, which at the time was like a niche market that people didn't know there was a wide variety of people who wanted to be catered to with cozy games.
Yeah, it was not, in many of the early days of video games, that was not why people went to video games, especially when they were new. It was like, oh, here's this exciting action-packed thing. Which is so different than what a lot of people seek in games today, I think.
I still remember when I would go to the store to try and get the games that I wanted, I would usually have to, I would go up to the counter and be like, here's Harvest Moon with these, cute little cows on the front cover. And they would be like, of course you would be buying this kind of game. And they would just, completely neg me, and I would have to bring up obscure, game mechanic terms in order to make them leave me alone.
I know games.
Yeah. I had to be turn-based or active combat.
Well, and Harvest Moon has been around for a while, and we've gotten lots of different Harvest Moon games. So I think that has been a series that existed back in the day. And although we know it was originally targeted to boys still, and I think Harvest Moon is a good example of one of those games that people consider oh, that's a girl game. But even back in the day, it was the default was that boys were playing video games and not girls.
The fans back in the day with Harvest Moon had to send letters to Marvelous, who makes the games, and had to try and convince them to put a female character in the game and to make female versions of the game so that people could play as girls. They just genuinely didn't believe that anybody out there was playing them when their audience was mostly women. It's wild how wrong the demographic was.
But I also played a lot of Nancy Drew games growing up, and I know that you have played almost all of them now. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you like about the Nancy Drew games and maybe like that format of PC game.
What is there not to like about the Nancy Drew games? The Nancy Drew games are kind of like point and click adventure mystery series where basically you're playing through a Nancy Drew book and you get to go pick up items, solve puzzles. You have to talk to people and try to piece together who's lying and solve the mystery in the end. But they're also very tongue-in-cheek. Like, they're very zany. They have like really terrible voice acting on purpose. At the ends of the game, sometimes you'll see outtakes where they use the like character models that they had to do fake outtakes like it was a bad movie, just to give the kind of mood of the Nancy Drew games. So I really, really, really love them. I love that in games you can show such a distinct kind of taste and such a distinct brand, but as consistently as the Nancy Drew series has done it, because I think they have 33 games now.
I feel like those games are an interesting example of a game that seems like it would be targeted towards girls, and it very much like was able to be for girls, but it doesn't feel like overly targeted towards a specific gender. That you can have like a game that appeals to girls and to women without having it be a Barbie princess game. Because Nancy's great. She's a very strong protagonist, even if she is not the smartest sometimes.
Yeah, all of the Barbie games were covered in like pinks and purples, and they were about dressing up. And you had like other Barbie games, like you had the Detective Barbie games, which actually were fairly similar to the Nancy Drew games as things go. But it seems like the people who made the Nancy Drew games really just wanted to put the book in essence into a game. And in so doing, you don't have to paint the whole cartridge pink in order to let people know that this is for girls and no boys should touch it.
Exactly. So to pivot a little bit, do you remember kind of at what point did you know that you wanted to make games?
So this is kind of funny because I knew that I always wanted to be a writer. And it wasn't until I was like 20, already halfway through college, that a boy that I was dating at the time was like, why don't you just write for games? You can do that, right? And I was like, can you? And it was the first time I had ever considered it. But after that idea had been planted into my head, I decided to go into freelance games writing to see if it was even a thing that I could do. And the rest is history, I guess.
So on that, what has been your experience kind of getting into the game industry? How has that been for you?
It has been difficult and also like seemingly random. I've been able to like make somewhat of a reputation for myself in the games industry just by working enough jobs and eventually meeting enough people who liked what I did and then wanted to continue helping me. So whereas like most jobs you would be able to actually go get like a full-time paying job, which is not a thing that is easy to do in the games industry. And then it's also hard to find other established game devs who have like years long careers. Usually when you go to meetups and stuff, you meet other game devs who are just starting out or have just gotten out of college and that kind of thing. But I think as much as most industries are who you know, I think that game dev is a lot more who you know right now because of the lack of like full-time paid opportunities that are available.
Right, yeah. It's sort of a good thing and a bad thing that it has become much easier to make a game. You know, anybody can by themselves, totally 100% alone, like make a video game. And I feel like that's been great that that's become more accessible, because you think about that back in the day, it was a very small number of people who understood how to like code and create games, and it was very hard to learn, and there's only a few people who could, but now anybody can just on their laptop, and that's great. But also I feel like there's that assumption that in order to get into the industry, like you have to have already made like 3 or 4 games by yourself.
And that's not entirely a false idea. That's out. You don't need to make a bunch of complete games by yourself, but you do need a portfolio, and you're generally going to have to work your way up from working for free or working similar like low paid projects to get a portfolio, and then work into jobs that are going to pay you something. I do agree that a lot of the technology has gotten more accessible to a lot more people than back in the beginning when we started. But I think that there's still a lack of accessibility when it comes to when it comes to like racial demographics, and especially outside of the USA, we have a lot of international developers who are trying to break into the games industry. And basically, if you're not in like the United States, Canada, Japan, and maybe some specific places in Europe, you're going to have a really hard time getting yourself established, even with all of the wonderful tools that the internet has made available to people.
Right. It's not that hard to make a game. It's a lot harder to get it out there and have people notice it, I think. That seems like it's more of the issue.
And then even harder to break even.
Yeah, so on that note, let's talk about your latest game, To Be With You, which is a visual novel that you made almost entirely by yourself. Is that correct?
Yes, I had a composer work with me, but other than that.
Yeah, so can you tell me a little bit about, let's start with some of the influences for that game.
To be honest, I can't say that I had many direct influences with that game, aside from my life. So to be With You is a semi-autobiographical game. So I'm taking an experience that happened to me and I am anonymizing it and repackaging it to put it out there to hopefully, with this game specifically, to help teach people about unhealthy relationships and what they look like and how they can potentially avoid them in the future through an interactive story.
Yeah, that is, I mean, such a unique take on what video games can do and, you know, why we play video games, because it's very much not in that original sense of, oh, video games are exciting or like an escape or this sort of like, I don't want to say that To Be With You isn't a fun game, but
it's not really though. It's definitely a painful experience to play through. I would say, just having watched people like stream it and play through it on their own, it's not fun, really. It's a very I remember that after I made it, a reporter told me that it wasn't a fun game to play through, but it was extremely like gripping. Like it immediately drew them in and it didn't let them go until it was finished. So it was like a very consuming experience, but not one that he would describe as fun. And I thought that was pretty accurate and pretty correct as for what I was going for too.
Yeah, I think there is space for that in the games world. I mean, if we look at other forms of media, at books and TV and movies, there are plenty of examples of us seeking out things that are not fun, but are gripping and emotional and useful in a way.
I think the whole like games are fun is like as reductive as the idea that games are gameplay and that none of the other aspects that go into a game matter materially aside from the gameplay. We've seen enough games that are primarily narrative stories that you walk through that have gotten really popular and successful to see that the gameplay isn't always the biggest draw for people in games.
Can you talk about a few of the reasons why you do like that genre and you like kind of making games in that genre?
The thing that I like the most about games is the interactive aspect of it. And for me, visual novels are really important because you get to interact with and manipulate the player's expectations as you're actively telling the story. So you're essentially, without having to interrupt the flow of the story, if you want to cause people to have a certain emotional reaction, you can design the game to give them that emotional reaction at that time without disrupting the flow. And by also giving them the ability to participate in the story and kind of help carve out their own personal experience with the story, which I think helps people empathize more deeply and get more involved in it. I honestly feel like visual novels and games, narrative-based games as an extension, are this ripe opportunity for us to help like teach people and help people learn through experiences so that they won't they won't have to experience these things in real life. They can experience them in like a safe, simulated environment and then use the skills that they learned in real life to at least in the case of To Be With You, to help protect themselves from falling into a really unhealthy relationship situation. So I feel like the whole like that idea that visual novels are by default boring because you can only read them is rather a reductive way of looking at the genre.
Yeah, for sure. I think visual novels have that power, and it's almost the inverse, but almost the same argument as like video games make people violent. And we know that they don't, but it's interesting to see if they can make other positive impacts through having people experience these things.
I think anecdotally, a lot of us have had experiences with video games where some aspect of the story just hit us really hard and stayed with us. And I think that by itself is enough to show the potential that they have for introducing us to new experiences and empathizing with maybe kinds of people that we wouldn't ordinarily get to interact with in our daily lives.
Yeah, 100%. And this is going to be a pivot, but I guess I can connect it to interacting with people. But I want you to talk a little bit about all the other things you do on the internet, which is many. You also write for normal like journalistic publications, and you also write for YouTube videos, and you have also edited YouTube videos, and you also stream on Twitch constantly. You also do a million other things. Can you talk a little bit about how those things interact with you making games?
So I've worked a number of side hustles, as you've pointed out. I'm a streamer on Twitch where I like analyze narratives, since that's my job and it helps people get interested in the kinds of games that I make. I also make narrative design videos on like my Patreon, and have worked all over the video game industry with articles and YouTube videos and all that, as you're suggesting. As a narrative designer in particular, that all is very useful to understand how people are talking about games, how they're thinking about them, to be able to play a game with a chat actively and see people responding to the game in real time, and to see some of the misunderstandings about why games end up maybe as janky as some of them do, or why they're making certain decisions when everyone's like, it would have been so much better if they just programmed it like this. Why didn't they just do that? There's a lot of like insight that can be gotten into like the average person who plays a game that is very useful when designing games.
You can almost test run or see how people are going to react to certain narrative elements when you see that in your Twitch chat, I'm sure.
Yes, yes, very much. And if anybody out there is a game developer and you've ever had a game that you've made streamed, it is incredibly useful to watch people play with the mechanics that you've built, and to see how they respond to the story elements and the different characters, and to know whether you achieved your goal in creating the game. A lot of times that can be hard to see in real time how people, because people can exploit mechanics, they can create little cheats and bugs and stuff like that. And you need to really understand what's fun about your game, and whether what you think is fun about your game is actually what people find fun about your game. And that's something you can only really find out by watching them play.
Have you played any of your own games on your stream?
I have like my own games that I personally put out under my company Illis Seed. And then I have other games where I've been involved, but the games belong to other indie studios. And both of those games I have played on both of those kinds of games I've played on my stream. Well, some of the games that I'm working for are under NDA right now, unfortunately. But I can say that I have been working with Waking Oni, the Waking Oni Studios, on a game called Unsen Master, which is a very family-friendly game. It best described as Studio Ghibli meets Overcooked.
Oh, fun.
So I got to do the narrative design for that game, and that game will be out sometime in the next few months of this year. And yeah, other than that, the things that I can talk publicly about are my Patreon and all of the writing and narrative design information that I've been putting out over there. So that is until I'm able to talk about the other projects that are in the works, that's what I get to talk about.
Do you have any ideas or things you'd like to prioritize for your next game that you do on your own? Do you even want to do a game on your own again?
I think I will end up doing another game on my own. I've had a couple of ideas on the back burner, but nothing that feels very pressing to me to get out immediately. Whereas I'm kind of more focused on getting a book, an actual book out there. So more of that like jack of all trades things. I just right. hop between the creative mediums as I see fit.
Right. And there's a lot of overlap between them. So I think you'll be able to bring a lot of the things that you've learned to a book and bring the things you learned from that book into a game and, kind of keep hopping between things.
I agree. This is a can of worms we don't need to open right now, but I will say that like my philosophy about book novels are that they're a lot more interactive than people tend to think about them. So I'm very curious how my experience with interactive games is going to feed into novels and maybe make that experience a little bit different.
Yeah, that's really cool. So we are about out of time, but I want to give you an opportunity to plug all the different ways that you are online. I feel like I could do this for you, but I'm going to let you do it yourself.
Well, the primary ways that you can find me are Twitch, Twitter, and Patreon. My online username is Cheratomo, Cheratomo, and you can find me on all social media under that name. You can find To Be With You on itch.io. You can also go to illusseed.com, ILLUSSEED.com, and you can find all of the games that I've ever worked on if you're interested in them, and links to where you can purchase or download them for free.
That about does us for this very first episode of Made in Progress. Thank you so much, Cara, for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was very fun.
Thank you, Leland and Cara, for that lovely talk. It's good to get a little bit of a different perspective and more direct on the up-and-comers of the industry today, to see what is going on right here in the area and right here in the industry that we hold so dearly. The biggest thing that I think we have now is have cyberpunk glitches. Wait,
of course you do.
Well, I mean, that's one thing that Nintendo does very well. There's never been one instance that I've heard with a new Nintendo release, just new Nintendo release, having any sort of mass amount of trouble. So I think Nintendo is going to be fine. I think they're going to fix Skyward Sword. That even though it didn't need fixing, but
didn't really need fixing.
I think that's actually one of the reasons why they have a relatively long producing cycle. As if you see every single time they gotta say we have a new game. It's like if it wasn't like 5 or 6 years, you never heard news about it. Thinking of the Metroid news and Bayonetta 3 and some other thing else. We do have No More Heroes 3 in this direct.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. But thinking of how long we have been waiting.
Yeah, I mean, like Metroid Prime 4, right, Miles?
Yeah. I mean, the one thing I'm disappointed about with the Nintendo Direct was we did not get any news on Metroid Prime 4. It's been over a decade since Metroid Prime 3, and there have been Metroid games in between.
Yes, but it's been almost a decade, but also when did they tear it down and start anew?
I think they announced that, I'd have to look at a number, but they announced that they were scrapping production and starting from scratch a year or two ago, maybe.
Ooh.
And, when you're starting from scratch, that's not really that big of a number yet. Like, you're still in sort of pre-production. Like, it's going to take them a while.
There's probably working on concept art and design and stuff for a lot of those years. I mean, that's what they said about Cyberpunk. Mm-hmm. We're in development for over 10 years, and then you've come to find out that it didn't start major production until 5 years ago. And I was like, hopefully they didn't get too far before they had to scrap it.
Yep.
Because that'll be an exciting thing to see in the future. It's going to be very good to see where it goes. I have great hopes for the future of the Switch.
Absolutely.
But I think that is just about all the time we have for this week. But I want to thank you for listening to the Museum of Art and Digital Entertainment's official podcast, everybody. And if you have any thoughts, questions, corrections, or general museum ideas, shoot us an email at info@themade.org.
We'd like to send a big thank you to everyone who donated recently and to our Patreon supporters who keep the Made afloat. Patreon donors get to listen to this podcast 1 week before it's released on major streaming services, and we'll continue that with future episodes every week. Till then, I'm Miles.
I'm Chen.
And I'm Red. Thank you, and we will see you next time.